to talk to you about issues around consistency and how do you create a process that is as fair and equitable as possible. I have a wonderful set of panelists here, and I will allow them to introduce themselves, starting with Michael on the right.
Hey everybody. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer for a EdTech training organization called CodePath. Before that, I've spent like a decade working around nonprofit, like fast growth startup company, did a stint over at Y Combinator, and currently over at CodePath. We've actually started a number of years ago as the first program that was a boot camp for more experts, experienced engineers, quickly accelerating their learning into a new technology. Since then, we've done a lot of internal training programs, running internship programs for Facebook. We currently play a big role in managing the internal mobile transition for Airbnb. So around 25% of Airbnb's mobile team have been trained by CodePath at this point. And then more recently, we've gotten into the recruiting space where different tech companies like Netflix or Facebook or Intuit will sponsor our courses to recruit out of. Although I have been mentioning this being on the senior engineering level, we also recently expanded across universities where we've touched around 20 universities where we take the classes that we are teaching internally at these tech companies. We put them directly on various colleges, directly on the campus so that there can be a direct a journey to job placement. And that's me.
Good afternoon. My name is Sydney Brunson. I work at Pinterest. I help people discover and do what they love. But most importantly, in my current role, I'm diversity program specialist, where I work really multifacetedly in our inclusion and diversity team. So I, of course, help with recruiting, hiring, and retention. And in tandem with that, I also support our inclusion efforts, so our internal employee communities, anything related to belonging. But I also have the really neat job to work with my boss, who's our head of inclusion and diversity, on diversifying the product. So ensuring that people, regardless of what you look like, are able to find a space for them in Pinterest and not having to do a lot of queries to get to something that looks like them, but it pops up more and resonates. So that's also the really cool part of my job as well, is not only helping find more people to join Pinterest, but also making sure that our now 200 million monthly active users are able to have a home in Pinterest as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya. I work at Coursera. Coursera is an online education company. We partner with over 150 universities around the world to put really world-class courses online for anyone anywhere to access. And kind of the main mission of Coursera is ultimately to bridge the opportunity gap that laborers in this bridge. So I've been there for about 4 years as an engineer, for 3 years, and for a year and a half almost I've been an engineering manager. And the latest capacity I've been involved in hiring quite a bit at Coursera, and specifically with an eye towards improving the diversity and inclusion. I also co-lead our women engineering at Coursera, along with two other teams. So that's been a great journey.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Just hold it closer to your mouth.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Sorry.
It's the mic, yeah.
And yeah, before Coursera, I was working at Google for 3 years as an engineer as well.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we started a conversation when we were outside, which I think is going to be really exciting. So we're just going to jump right in. And I actually want to start with Sydney for the first question. So what does consistency mean at Pinterest when we're thinking about hiring?
Sure. So consistency in a simpler form at Pinterest, ensuring that everyone, if let's say we're taking this in consistency in hiring and interviewing, everyone that goes through our pipeline has the same process, gets evaluated by the same methodologies and standards across the board. Whether this is in Eng, whether this is in business, regardless of what you're coming to Pinterest as a potential candidate, that you're seeing the same type of evaluations and assessment of your potential fit in our organization. And I didn't mention this when I did my introduction. I realized before Pinterest, I'm very new to Pinterest. I just moved out here 2 months ago. Before that, I was at IBM. So I went from big box to very little box, where I worked as a senior strategy consultant. And so I'll kind of juxtapose some of my thoughts here on working at a 400,000 global company and then working at 1,200 people in an organization, and the differences too, depending upon for you all where you fit in that.
And Michael, when you think about consistency, what does that mean for CodePath?
Well, so CodePath is across a bunch of different tech companies. So I actually think consistency in 2 ways is largely a myth. One from the actual quality bar. We'll have a class over at Box. We'll have classes over at Google. We'll have classes over at Facebook. We'll have a data set to compare all these engineers. And companies that say that they have really rigorous hiring bars, well, yeah, it's hard to get through, but then you look at the variability in the actual quality of on-the-job performance. And there are some people at top tech companies that you wonder how they got there. And there's a lot of people at companies that don't have the brand names who could run circles around a lot of these people who are part of this more privileged group. So that's one way I kind of think consistency is a myth. Like, you just kind of see people producing, building projects day to day. And another way I think consistency is very, very challenging is if you look at the interviewing process and you look at the different pieces that are very human-centric. So I'm talking about I am somebody who has been recently trained as an interviewer, and then I'm interviewing someone, and maybe it's part of a panel of different interviews. I may be a good interviewer, I may be a bad interviewer, I may be nitpicking something that is a bias that I have. I may not get the background of where this person is coming from. I may not care. I may have really good context. I may not have good context. But there's this part that is constantly in turnover. You can't have the same people always interviewing inside of a company. So especially at larger tech companies, it's really hard to say every single interviewer is consistently evaluating in the same way. And so I think it's very, very challenging to say, yes, we have this exact process. You can have a set of rules, but from our experience, being asked to train these interviews at different companies, we see that a lot of, it's a big challenge. It's very hard to be consistent. And I guess maybe I have one more small piece there to add about the consistency piece. There's also disagreement among these engineers of what a quality engineer even means. Because you may have one screen that's more of a one-size-fits-all that's meant to apply to a variety of different roles. It can be a huge challenge at smaller companies. Everyone's a back-end engineer. They're trying to interview, say, more front-end engineering positions. And it may not be a fair assessment process. You also have just maybe someone comes from a math PhD background. So they feel like everybody needs to solve math proofs to prove that they're a great engineer when that's not really what's necessary on the job. I think there's a lot of major challenges of consistency. So yeah, it's...
So Priya, how are you handling some of these challenges at Coursera?
Yeah, so around the same time, we were planning to ramp up our engineering hiring quite a bit, and at the same time, we wanted to also make it a very consistent process. So before that, all the different teams were hiring individually, managers were deciding what are the classes they wanted to be, and so on. So it was very inconsistent. So I was kind of leading part of that effort to make it consistent. I was mostly focusing on what our process should be for hiring new grad engineers. So we're newly graduating either from universities or from other, or switching into software engineering career from other non-traditional backgrounds. So yeah, at that time we kind of started from scratch and from going from the top, how to get consistency into our sourcing, screening resumes, should we even screen resumes? Ultimately, that's what we actually ended up deciding to not use resume screening at all. And how do we do screening, how do we get them to a phone screen stage, what do we do in the phone screen to make it consistent, what happens on site, what's the rubrics we use to evaluate candidates, how do we make the decisions, who makes the decisions, and so on. So a lot of different pieces to tune and make consistent. The challenge, so of course all of this takes time, so that's one part of the challenge, right? In order to build up these questions that are good and are going to test candidates properly, and then training all the interviewers and administering those questions and all of that takes a long time. So that's one part. The second part, I think, what you brought up is really good, is that you might use the same questions, and that's great. Like at least that's a fair baseline. But is that really evaluating for different roles properly? Is that all actually going to bias you towards some candidates who might be really well prepared for those type of questions, and bias against some who might not have done that exact type of preparation, but are actually going to perform really well in the job? So those are some ways in which we've run into challenges that can make the process consistent, but like what's the right balance of actually evaluating fairly for the role that you're hiring for versus a consistent process for the name of consistency.
So you introduced this idea of bias, which is certainly something that a lot of us have been talking about in Valley, and there's been lots of courses on. Wondering what are some of the things that we can do to mitigate bias in the process? It seems like that might be one of the goals of having a more consistent process. But what do we do to mitigate bias?
Yes, so I definitely agree with that. And I think that consistency is kind of the second step. I think the first step is recognizing and then making steps to manage or mitigate that bias, and then creating consistency off that. Because if you're consistently biased, like what does that really do for you?
Right.
So at Pinterest, we do a lot of things. So one, everyone at Pinterest has to go through unconscious bias training. And that's essentially to, one, create a safe space to open up and say that everyone's biased. Like, I think by admitting that and saying that first and not, pointing and making people feel bad about having certain biases and recognizing that all of us are biased in some different way is step number one. So once everyone goes through that training, then the next steps are, to Jude's point, are doing the things to mitigate bias. So first thing, even before a candidate walks into the room, the first thing they're going to see is the job description, right? That's the first way that people apply to jobs. And sometimes we don't give job descriptions as much credit as they need because it really is the only time a candidate gets to assess a job before they come on site. So having words like rock star or like a coding ninja overly indexes to males. Like, no, I'm being serious. Like, those are terms that are used. It sounds silly, but those are terms, especially here in, in Silicon Valley, in tech, people like to be very fun. In their descriptions, don't realizing how using a term like a rock star or a ninja then creates extreme masculine type of terms in a job description. Something as little as that, as saying the word ninja that you wouldn't even think of, can truly create then a bias. Same thing with the biases that can creep in interviewing. One thing that I used to be guilty of is telling people after an interview, like let's say I know the next person who's going to interview them, like, she's great, like I love her, or like, hate her, like, no, I wouldn't say that, but just not a good candidate, like, oh, be careful. And then because what that does, that creates bias immediately right there. So whoever's next, especially if I have a relationship, they're going to be doing what's called confirmation bias. So they're going to be confirming either the positive attribute or the negative attribute I gave to the candidate. So for the rock star, her saying something small is being over-indexed to her being greater than what she probably really is, because I've now created a cognitive bias in our mind. When we think about our brains, and I'll pass it along, like we process a lot of information, about like 12 million bits at a time, but we really only consciously in our system 1 processing can actually think about 40. So we make a lot of mental shortcuts because it's too much at one time for our brains. And so when system 2 comes in, that's where that bias comes in. So that same thing, that little comment of me saying someone's great or someone's I'm not so excited about, can create a world of a difference in the process. And then the last thing too is like similar to me, and I think this is the most important, especially being here at Beyond the Degree, is that I'm looking for similarities. So I want to find someone that's similar to me and I'm going to like them. And that can cast out a lot of people, and not even from an educational standpoint, things socioeconomically. So if you're talking about how you yacht, on the weekends, that right there has a socioeconomic kick to it, right? Because you have to have money to get on a yacht. They're not free. So that right there, even things like that, and you're talking about your boating experience, it seems so innocent. What that does to someone who's maybe never experienced that, and how you now are creating not only a power dynamic like the last panel, but also inconsistency in the process to the person who might then also too yacht. So now you like them a lot because they yacht just like you do, and you now have created this similar to me thing, and you're just creating clones in your organization because you like them. And as we know, jobs are not about just liking people, but you truly being a fit for the role.
have a question for you.
No, go ahead.
So Michael, you've seen different companies about how they're thinking about bias in their process. So what have you seen across the organizations that you've worked with?
They do a really bad job, like everybody. In terms of what's wrong or what's
Well, is there anything that's working, or is it all bad?
I would say there are some things that I think, depending on the engineering manager, not necessarily representative of the organization, I've seen some things that look like they work really well. So one example is for the roles that you're interviewing for, the interview should be as close as possible to what it would look like to actually do the work. And that's generally not the trend. Not to throw Google under the bus, but throw Google under the bus. Google, everybody copies Google's interviewing process, Facebook's interviewing process, all these startups coming up, they just, they hire out of those companies and they copy the same process. And then you have data structures and algorithms and system design and whiteboarding. And then it's really weird and strange because you don't, for most of the roles you're going to have at that company, you actually don't do that day to day. So then there's a question on how consistent are you being in terms of being able to be predictive in your interview process about these being future performers. That's not an easy thing to solve, but I have seen some hiring managers go to great lengths to have more project-based interviews where they try to make it the same type of, low pressure or high pressure over time you're not, just try to make it reflect more of what it'd be like working there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a former VP of engineering of this startup, MyFitnessPal, that was acquired by Under Armour. And as he was building and growing that team, he was previously at Mevo, where all of his bosses were women, by the way, female engineers, female founder. So, and he's always done a great job of having really diverse engineering organizations. So he would make it a priority to reach out to people, but he would make it a very low pressure, we're going to pretend we're working together. This is not easy to design. I'm not going to pretend it's easy to design, but I have seen certain managers that have been able to kind of talk with their team about what engineering skills and values are really, really important, but try to distill that to, okay, now we're working on the job, and you're balancing assessment with this actually feels like what it would to work here. I haven't seen, there's challenges doing this company-wide, say you have a project-based screen at the very beginning, if a candidate's going to do 10 different project-based screens, they might just, engineers tend to be kind of lazy with wanting to do that. It's really time intensive. Something that would be really awesome for the industry is if there were some sort of project, almost think of like a standard application, some sort of project work you could do that was more role specific. Maybe that would take 5 to 10 hours to complete, but if that was accepted by a number of companies where it's okay, great, from a mid-level programmer in, say, Swift or Java for this type of back-end role, this would be in line with what we're actually talking about. Then that would, that could be an example. One project-based assessment, and then it would apply to a number of companies. So I think one big thing is just try to make the interview process as similar as possible as it is, and then knowing that it's quality because ideally there can be a feedback mechanism between, say, the interviewing process and then with actual performance on the job, like performance evaluations. It can be really challenging to connect these departments, data sharing, especially large companies, but if you can do that, then that feedback loop, instead of recruiters high-fiving themselves every time there's a hire, recruiters are high-fiving themselves when it's a 6-month, 1-year evaluation, and those people are high performers. And I think that's one area that's kind of missing from the feedback cycle.
So it seems like what you're advocating for is a kind of consistency between the actual work that candidates will be doing and the way that they do, right? So that there's some alignment there. And then a second type of consistency that you suggested was that there probably needs to be a greater consistency around the expectations industry-wide for certain roles or jobs, which can help candidates in the sort of former interview. Is that fair?
Yeah, and actually the reason why I keep talking about consistency, and we are talking about diversity and inclusion, I view the issue of us having not as much diversity as we should as being fundamentally an equity problem. My hypothesis is that if we provide the access and greater transparency and we give more people a more fair chance, then we will see diversity numbers rise across women and various underrepresented groups. And then in our own, think of CareerPath as almost like a test experiment. Thousands of engineers, in a class, you have Google and Facebook and a lot of people from no-name backgrounds. And then we consistently see people who are just extremely undervalued, but they're outliers. It's not like a little bit better. It's like they end up building 80% of the code base for a startup on their team. And you couldn't believe that they actually are struggling to pass certain types of interviews or get certain types of opportunities.
Priya, I want to bring you into this conversation. As we were talking earlier, you talked about some of the shortfalls of focusing on consistency. And I wonder if you'd share some more about it.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, I think to kind of also join with what you guys were saying before, I think the project-based learning was really cool. When we were kind of thinking about what should our screening be like, we started with okay, let's see how can we make resume screening consistent, right? And we're like, okay, what do recruiters or hiring managers look for when they're looking at resumes, right? So we started writing down things, and I'm like, okay, let's give this points. And ultimately, we gave up because we were like, okay, ultimately, if we're going to do this, even if we say, okay, we don't care about school, we don't care about GPA, let's take those things out. What is that, right? Maybe so this is for new grads, so they don't have a lot of experience. So, okay, maybe we'll look for internships. So let's say if they have some internship before, then how do we give points for that? So, okay, maybe. So then, ultimately, what we will end up with is okay, maybe we'll give 5 points to if they have an internship in a well-known company, and then that's pointless, right? Because then that just defeats the purpose of this whole thing. Because somebody who had the opportunity to go to that Facebook or Google for an internship will probably even get a job easily. So then we completely gave up on resume screening, and we're like, okay, let's come up with some sort of a take-home assignment, which we can give to everyone, and they can take a few hours and write the code. And we wanted to come up with something that was similar to what engineers do at Coursera. So we did one version of that for new grads, and then we did another version of that for more senior hires. So the challenge there, ultimately we did end up with a couple versions of those, and then we made another one for front-end engineers as well, which was different and more closer to what they would do day to day. The biggest challenge I think that we ended up with was that it takes a long time to develop these really good standard assessments, be the candidate's time, right? That's what I really like. What you're saying is we could have a common one that works in companies, because we're a lot of candidates would not want to spend that much time, and especially senior candidates who already have jobs may not want to spend that much time doing 8-10-hour assignments. And then thirdly, the other thing we saw over time was some of these would get leaked as well, right? So would get leaked, people would put solutions online, Coursera is asking this particular question in their take-home assignment, so then you have to kind of keep on top of that and keep developing that. So that was one of the challenges, I think. Yeah.
And we've talked a bit about process, we've talked about bias. What about sourcing? What is the role of consistency as we think about sourcing candidates?
Do you want me to
We can start.
Sure. Yeah, so actually sourcing is one thing over the last year and a half where we eventually, I feel landed in a place where we feel being consistent might actually hurt. So last year, so the year before 2 years, for new grad hiring, we would not go out that much. We wouldn't go to that many career fairs. We were hiring mostly from interns and stuff, so it was very small pipeline. But last year, we wanted to expand our pipeline quite a bit. So we're okay, let's go all out. We'll go to 20 schools across the country, and so we did that. And ultimately, we did not end up with any more diverse pipeline of students. Because the students we were meeting at all these colleges were the same that were applying to our site anyway. So this year what we decided is okay, if what we really care about is diversity, then let's focus all our explicit sourcing into actually just going to places where we find these candidates. So it's actually really consistent if you think about it, right? We're only going to place Hopper, I'm going to Tapia conference next week, and we're just we're going to Harvard Med because they have really good gender diversity in that school. And so we're just going to 4 or 5 different things. We have referral parties focused on where we encourage employees to just focus on referring either women candidates or people of color and so on. So we've kind of actually turned around from being like very general, like let's just go after everyone, to like let's just focus on what we really want to focus on. So yeah, I feel like in sourcing, in fact, like depending on what your goals are, you might actually want to be more consistent. But definitely, like once you're starting to evaluate a candidate, that's where you want to become consistent and like have a fair process.
I think Priya brought up one thing about goals at the end of what she was saying. I think it's important because sourcing looks different for every company depending upon where your gaps are and what your needs are, right? So you might, from a zoomed out lens, like have a great balance of underrepresented groups at your organization. So like, what does that look like? Then let's zoom in and look at each level. Is that the big pot where new grads and stuff, and most companies are the biggest bulk of hiring, right? So if we're looking at our statistics, it's like, oh, we're doing well, but then we zoom in and look at, like for example, we have levels at Pinterest, same in a lot of other companies. So let's say we're looking at L6 and above, which are engineering managers and more senior engineers. Is it consistent? You know, does that maybe 30% of women, does it still hold strong once you go higher up? I think that's the first thing to look at sourcing, and then creating your sourcing strategies based upon truly what you need and not just saying, let's just recruit, and source, and not looking back at truly where you're growing. I think some sourcing strategies that I think are really effective, one of them particularly being at Pinterest that I think is really important is not only that you're sourcing, but having appropriate funnels for candidates to come through. So to disagree a little bit with you and you saying that equity was so important, I think that the inclusion and belonging piece is really more because you can give everyone access to the room, but if they don't feel like they should be there, that totally, you're not gonna stay in that room a long time. So sure, they say they got there, they made it to Microsoft, they made it to Pinterest, they made it to whatever, but like, did you stay? And a lot of times, especially looking at people of color and women, it has a lot to do with how they feel, and they feel that they belong at the organization. So one of the things that we do at Pinterest, we have an apprenticeship program where it is essentially what LaborX is looking for, talent that is not traditional to the tech industry. It's completely, everyone is either, learn their programming skills from like boot camps or, training their own selves or other ways outside of having a typical CS degree. And at a Stanford or Harvard or MIT, none of those things are taking effect. And the apprenticeship is essentially for a year. And every 3 months you're being evaluated for you to be able to be converted from a contingent worker to be full-time, for you to come on to move from contract. And I think that that's one of the best ways too. Not only are we sourcing, looking for the talent that may not be tapped in yet, but also making sure that they have a place that's going to be safe for them. Because someone that's coming from a 4-year CS degree at Stanford and someone who doesn't have a 4-year degree at all and is just solely going from a boot camp is going to have some psychological things that maybe make them feel less than in that organization and that they can't compete. So having programs and structures, I think, is equally as important, and not just having them there and kind of freeing them like, you've made it, now just go with the wind and just hope it works out for you. And making sure that you set up structure for each of the pipelines that you're building that fits for them. So I think that that's a great way that we have the apprenticeship program. They're not coming in with the rest of the class and expecting and having those feelings of doubt and all the other things that come in any job that you're taking on. So I think that's important. I didn't speak too much on sourcing strategies. I totally agree with Priya and kind of demystifying like the resume and the things like that and looking for untapped talent at historically black colleges and universities or other places that may not be, the traditional place you would go to look for tech, but also ensuring that in that pipeline you're trying to create that it's appropriate funnels for them to come into your organization and to stay. I think we think a lot about getting people there, but like, why are they staying? And so that's why I had to disagree a little bit with my panelists on the equity piece, and that is important to everyone to have access, but you have to want to stay in that new place.
Are you able to share anything about the conversion rates for your apprenticeship program?
Off the top of my head right now in this chair, no. But I can definitely do the research and follow up. I don't want to misspeak, but I will say that there's a high number, whatever it is, it's a high percentage in regards to retention and conversion of our apprenticeship program. I just don't know those exact numbers right now. I don't know.
We know from another talk. What was it?
Yeah, we had a panel at General Assembly, and I think your first 3 have converted. apprentices.
Well, that's
That's
great.
what I said.
I was like, I don't know what it is. Yes, I knew it was high. Yes, so we've had great success with the program, and I don't start not knowing that number.
I do have a question on if it's.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I noticed that there were some hands up, so I have more questions, but why don't we get, well, here. Well, I'm gonna give you my mic,
Yeah.
and then we can pass that one around. This way Facebook Live can hear.
Thanks. So I represent a nonprofit training organization. I'm actually working on the Department of Labor apprenticeship grant in tech. So I've been really excited to hear about all the times apprenticeship has been called into practice and implementation in this conference. And it's a nascent program, homegrown at companies like Twilio, Pinterest, and LinkedIn. It's super exciting. But my question is maybe most directed to Michael. I'm thinking about like the consistency of then continued related instruction, related instruction is how the DOL frames it. But so, once the apprentices are converted, they've gone through a 12-week boot camp before their apprenticeship, and then they're getting the on-the-job learning, which is just critical, right? So they know how things work at Pinterest. But then assuring that they're keeping pace with the traditional candidate, for lack of a better term, who's gotten a 4-year computer science degree. Where then could CodePath come back in to make sure that these non-traditional candidates are still receiving training to keep pace?
Yeah, this is apprenticeships are really interesting because at some companies they've gone well, at other companies they haven't gone well. So apprenticeships at very small scale, you're talking about like 1 or 2.
Yeah.
You're sourcing from like a gigantic applicant pool. But then if you're talking about like scaling those programs, what is your process for then trying to figure out what signals, how do you identify? Say you're looking at different coding boot camps. Do you look at every coding boot camp? Do you look at a small number? And I think that maybe what might be helpful is kind of how we think of like developing a curriculum in general. So you have a specific audience. One thing that we don't like is the one-size-fits-all approach with education in general. For some people, it might take them 80 hours to complete an assignment. It takes someone else 2 hours because everyone's just dumped in the same place. A very effective learning program is very specific about the knowledge and skills someone has before, and then the learning is designed to fill in the gap that they have. And then if you have consistency with your selection process, and then with your curriculum, then you have consistent outcomes like proficiency, completion rate, satisfaction of students, and then from a company standpoint, you also have consistency with like hiring managers giving you a feedback loop of like, they know what we wanted them to know. So I think from the apprenticeship program there, I have a big question, from company to company, are they really consistent and specific with their selection? Like what does it look like? Is it an essay? Is it a project? Is it something that also does represent what they're going to do as they get on the job? And then the apprenticeship program, is it structured learning or is it depends on which manager they happen to be matched with? Some people are really good teachers and mentors, some people aren't. And internship programs also struggle with that consistency as well. So I would say, as opposed to a dump them in and let's see who's available to mentor, not all, and most engineers are not natural teachers and necessarily natural mentors. I'd say have a structured learning part of the apprenticeship program designed to fill in those gaps you identified in your selection process. And then there does need to be additional support. We can speak better to more of the technical gaps, but we've also seen with, we run Facebook's Facebook University program where they bring underrepresented groups who are freshmen to expose them to the tech industry. Half of it's like bridge the technical gap, half of it is like earn an internship for the next year at Facebook. There's a lot of soft skill challenges or just industry experience challenges that we actually don't address. We address more of like, okay, great, you can code and there's some commits and you know how to like kind of collaborate on a larger code base. But I think ongoing, there needs to still be a plan, a structured plan of consistently, okay, here were the gaps. Here's at a point where we should have had those gaps covered. I would say it's gonna, what you end up emphasizing depends on who you pick. One boot camp grad might have a CS degree. one boot camp grad may have nothing except for the boot camp. So I think you just need to be really specific. And then the challenge on a company is, as you do scale this apprenticeship program, are the resources available? Is the does the engineering leadership, do the founders, whoever, actually really believe in this enough to provide that layer of support? Or do they, get to a certain point, they're like, well, the Stanford CS students that started coding when they were 12 really are still doing better. And so companies, that's on a company by company basis. I haven't seen many companies willing to go in for the long haul, but hopefully more and more will kind of step up.
Yeah, thank you.
Some additional questions, if you'll pass the mic over here.
Quick question. You talked about the inclusiveness and belonging, and so setting up the structure for doing that. So to what degree, and maybe Michael, you touched upon this too, mentoring is an important part of that. So how are you training the mentors and ensuring consistency of mentorship in terms of, again, consistency is not necessarily everybody's doing the same thing, one size fits all. It's like, I may need 3 things, she may need 2 things. Those are 2 different things. How do you teach the mentors to recognize what's needed and to complement and engender professional growth along various paths that the companies want?
So I can speak to mentorship a little bit more eloquently in my experience at IBM, being that was the past 4 years versus 2 months. So at IBM, we took on mentorship more so from like an employee community or employee resource group type of basis, because mentorship and then sponsorship obviously are 2 different things and play such a major role in anyone's career. I think whatever field you're in, they're both so equally important. And I think that especially for underrepresented groups, you have the harder task of doing that, because most mentors or sponsors usually look like the other person. And if there's less of people that look like you, you're just statistically at, a disadvantage. So I think that by creating opportunities, because people want mentorship for a lot of different things. Some people need mentorship on a technical standpoint, and some just need more polishing and help with how to get to the next level. And then there's that aspect of reverse mentorship too, where there are senior leaders who also can really lean on the talent of the younger, more millennial task force for doing something as simple as, I just need help running my Twitter because I don't know how to do it, but it's really important for my brand. So I think to answer your question is that there's no right way, I think, to do mentorship. I think it has to be, to your point, it's not a one-size-fit-all. And it can't be inauthentic. I don't like the matching of, you person A gets paired with, lower-level person B, because then it's not genuine. And I think anyone in the room who has a mentor, and a good one, is someone that's fostered you not through obligation, but through like shared interest or just true compassion for you in that person. And that's really how you grow and bloom. So I think that, the employee resource group, I think, is a great way to do it, because it provides, one, people who are usually in part of ECs or ERGs are already active and engaged in whatever the group represents. And 2, it creates a safe place as well for you to feel free to say, I want a mentor, I'm looking for mentorship, or vice versa. And then making sure that you have kind of touch point goals. Like, okay, this mentorship relationship is to help me on topic X or whatever the things I'm looking for, and then to grow the relationship in that way. I think it's where you find the most benefit. But again, I don't think that there's this is the way you do mentorship and it works, because I think that mentorship is so organic. Now, sponsorship, that's completely different. You really do need someone to speak up for you in the rooms that you aren't. And usually those people don't look like you. I think that's the best part, is to find a mentor. That was always told to me, was find someone who doesn't look like you, because they'll also help and coach you on polishing on things that you won't even recognize or know. And so I think that having those 2 is the best way. I kind of went around in answering that, because I don't think that there's like, this is the way that mentorship works well, because it's organic. It's really about relationship building and providing people, I think, the room to find a mentor, and not necessarily mandating and saying, you get this mentor for this amount of time period and making it mechanical.
Well, maybe you need multiple mentors, right? You might need 2 or 3 for different things.
Oh, for sure.
So we're running out of time. We'll take one more question, but I do want to say that one of the things that you can do for mentors is to actually talk to the mentees to make sure that they are mentored, right? Because sometimes they don't know what they need. And you can help them, even though there might be inconsistent mentors, you can help them say, well, you might want to talk to someone else because you're not getting the support that you need. And so for an organization to assess from the mentee and say, are you getting this type of advice for your career? Are you getting this type of advice? And if you find that they're not getting that advice, then you can coach them to find someone else. But just one more question and then we're going to have to conclude.
Yeah, you were talking about apprenticeships quite a bit. Is there a great variety of types of apprenticeships and the structure? I'm actually involved with an apprenticeship, or will be, that is registered with the Department of Apprenticeship Standards for the state of California, and will be registered at a federal level as well. And do you know if most of these apprenticeships that you're talking about at these various tech companies are registered with these entities or headed that way?
I'm not sure about many of them. I think that it's unlikely because there's so much variability. Because some of the apprenticeships are like, it's like a month-long type of thing, and some of the apprenticeships are like over a year. And there's usually when I ask about like a structured learning approach, or I ask about like mentorship, or I ask about what training they put people through, it's usually like, some engineers volunteered, and that's what it is. And so I don't think so. It's a lot of times, there's an engineering manager, or there's an executive that's like, this is a good idea. I'd be really, really surprised if they are connected or even aware about that. Yeah. But I also, I haven't surveyed, so I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I want to thank everyone and thank our panelists. This is